It's a worker placement. No, it's an area majority. No, it's a bidding game. Well, it is all of the above. It is Spectre, the board game. So this is a game that is very ambitious mechanically because it takes mechanics. They're fairly different from one another and combines them in a fairly elaborate turn structure. So you'll be playing all of those things, all of those mechanics that they mentioned. As for the topic, as the title suggests, we are supervillains here of the Spectre. We are supervillains in the James Bond story world as created by Ian Fleming and expanded in many movies afterwards. And we are, each player will be taking the role again of one of those iconic villains. It may be Rosa Clapp, it may be Emilio Largo or Al Silva. Yeah, of course, we got Blofeld, what we're talking about. So you'll be one of these villains, and these villains are trying to be the most powerful and influential. During the game, each player will have a plaque such as this one representing their order in the food chain, and each role will have specific benefits associated with them, so that you always say Emilio or Rosa, but you may be number 1 or number 2 or whatever other number, depending on how well you're doing. And that is tracked by using this track here that will make the game look a little bit like a racing game, but actually this is basically a victory point track with some special spaces that will give you special benefits. But overall, the important thing is that if you're ahead, you are number 1, second player is number 2, and so on and so forth. You will play for a number of rounds, and at the end of the last round, the player who is ahead on the track, then that is the biggest predator in the Spectre hierarchy, and so the player wins the game. Here we have the board representing areas where we will be placing our henchmen, our villains, basically our workers in a worker placement perspective, activating different kinds of effects. Here at the bottom we have player aids and 2 decks of cards. One represents secret plans that are a substantial source of victory points. There are requirements printed on here, and if you meet the requirement, then you can reveal the card and you score one of those 2 numbers. Usually secret plans will be face up in front of you, because otherwise what makes them secret? And if you reveal a plan when you score it, then you score the highest number. If in their game effects, they may force you to reveal them beforehand, then when you score them at that point, you only score the lower number, still better than nothing. Another deck of cards that we have here is a deck of missions. These cards also represent the timer of the game. You only use a number of these in each game, so that the game is not this long. But usually each card is a turn, and it's resolved at the end of the turn, and this way you have variety precisely because you do not use every card in every game. At the end, at the beginning of each turn, a mission is revealed, so everybody knows what people are trying to achieve. In this case, well, we need to have somebody in area 7 on the board. And then we're going to see the resources that we can bid on. We'll see what that means. And there is a penalty if the objective is not completed, the mission is not completed, but there is a reward for completing the mission. But before we get there, a closer look at the unique boards of each villain. The game is definitely asymmetrical, with a hardwired element of asymmetry in the fact that different villains have different actions on their boards, both initial different starting actions and then unique actions that can be unlocked by performing this action. The action of finalizing plans is the only action that everybody has, because that action, if you have the corresponding resources to spend, will allow you to unlock these other actions, which may turn into one-time benefits, long-time benefits, long-lasting effects. It may open a new space where you can place your villain or your henchman. So that element of asymmetry is hardwired in here, plus again we have further elements of asymmetry coming from the fact that these roles, and therefore the unique powers that come with, also will change during the game. Worker placement, I think I mentioned that earlier. This is a worker placement with very few workers. You got two of them. You got your villain who has a round base and your henchman who has a square base. Plus you have a number of cubes representing agents, and you'll be dropping, well, you'll be placing those on the board based on different game effects, and these are used to establish majority, because remember, this is also an area majority game. So at the beginning of the turn, number one, whoever has this game component here, will draw a new mission and read it out loud again, so that people will know what to prepare for, because this will actually be resolved at the end of the round. Then in order from number 1 to number 4, each player first will place their villain, and resolving the effects of the space where the villain is placed, and then each player in turn will resolve their henchman, placing it and resolving that also. And again, it's worker placement style, so the area where you place your villain or henchman will tell you what to do. You perform that action. So you can place on an available spot on your board. Again, maybe more spots will be available later. Or you can place your henchman or villain on one of the spaces of the board. And I have introduced the fact that this board is really fairly poorly organized to me, because each area on this side is organized different from here. Here you have at the bottom, say, the area that is concerned with what happens when you place a villain or henchman. Then you have the advantage if later in the turn you have majority, and then you have the area up there where you place your agents. And the other side is worker placement, placing the agents, and at the bottom is the advantage for having majority. They wanted to make it look prettier, but they made it a lot considerably less playable, because in my experience it happens all the time. I'm looking at the area, I'm looking at that benefit, I do my thing, and then I realize that's not the benefit I should have been looking at, even more so when these two benefits are so far from one another. The idea remains the same. When I place my villain or my henchman in a certain space, if it's on my personal board, I activate the action associated with it. When it is here, well, usually I get to place an agent in the same area. Say, for example, in that case, it is, says area 3, and it says plus 1 agent in 3. Area 4 has plus an agent in 4. Area 5 plus an agent in 5. It is a reminder that when you place your henchman or villain on the board, you get to place an agent in the same area. Plus, there are other advantages here. For example, I also get to place an agent in one of those areas. Here, I will get to collect the blueprints that can be used to pay for different game effects, including unlocking, remember, those extra actions or benefits on a player's personal board, and so on and so forth. So it's a pretty tight worker placements, because you got two workers. If you spend one of them to open another action, well, then you'll be able to use in later turns, but that turn you only have one remaining action. Very, very tight economy there. Once we placed all of our workers, with all that entails, resolving effects and the like, and there may be also cubes from previous turns. Once we have placed all of our workers, then we start another phase in which we check for majority. So we start from area 2 and going upwards numerically, we check who has the majority. The player who has majority there gets the advantage. In this case, for example, red has majority in Villa Drax or Drax Villa, and they can move agents, maybe trying to steal majorities somewhere else. Here, red has majority, and they get to collect 2 gold tokens. Again, resources to pay for different kinds of things. More resources here, and so on and so forth. Having majority also means that you get to collect for the time being the corresponding majority token. If there is a tie, ties are not friendly, no one has majority, the token is placed back. And having control majority of certain areas will allow you to complete some missions that require precisely that. I mean, some secret plans. So, majority, so we have after we did our worker placement minigame, we have the area majority minigame in which we trigger these actions, we collect the things, and then it's time to have our third minigame, which is an auction game. Now we go to the mission and we look at the parameters. There may be a requirement here, and if we don't fulfill that requirement, we fail the mission immediately. Here, for example, we need to have somebody in area 7, and it's totally cool because we did have that right there. That's totally not cheating there. So, if the requirement here is not met, too bad, the mission is failed immediately. You don't get to play the mini auction that comes later. If it's not failed, then we need to start the auction. Basically, there's a certain numerical threshold that we need to meet in order to be able to complete the mission. And that threshold changes depending on number of players. The more players, the higher it is. And it's a sum of the agents and villains that players have in an area, in a specific area under interests, like 7 there, plus resources the players can bid. In this case here, for example, we can only bid blueprints. Other missions will allow us to bid different things. Say this one takes anything. So at the beginning of the turn, we also know the resource that will be the most important for the bid at the end. Players bid secretly, they can bid nothing, if they so desire, they reveal, and first we count to see if we completed the mission. If the mission is successful, then we see, by adding together all the resources from everybody. If the mission is successful, then we see who contributed the most. That's what makes them the coolest, because being the one that contributes the most makes you look cool, and that is when that gives you the opportunity of completing one of your secret plans. So completing secret plans is quite a chore, because first you need to acquire them, then you need to fulfill the requirement of the thing, and then you can't just say, well, I fulfilled it, I'm gonna score it right now. You need to be able to win the bid to be able to complete it. So that's the idea. After we resolve the mission card, which again has a whole bidding element to it, a whole bidding mini game. James Bond gets mad. We got number 1. We roll these dice. Number 1 also has the power to re-roll 1. And what happens next depends. If we rolled after the possible reroll, if we roll 2 gun barrels, then we remove a lot of agents from the board. If it's 2 numbers, then James Bond will go to the space indicated by the sum of those 2 numbers. You place the James Bond token there, and then of course we won't be able to deploy villains or agents or henchmen there next turn, because it's dangerous. There's James Bond there. If there is a gun barrel and a number, look, the procedure is a bit fiddly and complicated. Just pause the video and read. That's what happens. And that's about it. I know, many steps, right? After James Bond retaliates, we look at the scoring track up there, and we assign our numbers based on how we're doing up there. Again, number 1, number 2, etc., 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 with again those unique effects that will apply starting from next turn, and then we start a new turn. I know you may be a bit confused by now, but remember, it's basically 3 mini games. First, place 2 workers, worker placement style, then resolve area majority effects, then bid to see who contributes, if you can complete the mission and who contributes the most. Take all that into account, and you're ready to start the next turn. At the end of the last turn, player who is ahead on that track wins the game. This is a good game, maybe even a very good game, but it is weakened by elements of the production. It starts from the rulebook, which is not particularly clear or well organized in my opinion, and it's not easy to then retrieve information when you need to double check it, which you will, because the game has so many different phases, they work in different ways, different unique things. And it's easy to overlook a rule. You're looking at the paragraph, and there's nothing there that marks maybe like a very important passage from the rest. There isn't a single section where you have all the powers and abilities of all the villains summarized. It's more like in this phase of the turn, if the villain has an ability that it's meaningful there, then there is a box there for that. But I like a list because if I'm going to play, I need to know exactly what D'Amelio is going to do, what Blofeld is going to do. I need to have a sense of what the abilities are. And so I find myself asking all the time, and if I forget to do it and I lose something because I neglected that, that's annoying. Also, just a single reference with what are the powers of position number 1, number 2, number 3, and 4 are. That's less relevant, but why not have all of the information you want to double check in one place? I think that would have helped a lot. So you have a fairly elaborate turn structure, and again, not just like complete player aid you can hand to the players. And the board maybe looks better this way, with half of the board being organized one way and half differently, not just upside down, just differently organized. But again, the economy is tight. And realizing that you're wasting an action because the space doesn't have the ability that you expected it because of the way graphically things look, it can be pretty damaging and can be pretty annoying. And then going back in time, I'd like to redo something I did 2 turns ago. You're not going to do it, or you shouldn't be doing it. So there are just these external elements that should be cleaned up. I think that the developers here should have had a bigger or better role in making sure that the game is playable from the point of view of the material production. Is not just playable, but easily playable, that I don't have to worry about those elements. Because then the game actually was surprisingly effective. After going through the rulebook and seeing all of these parts of the turn that seems so disconnected, I was pretty skeptical, I'll tell you that. But I was actually pleasantly surprised by how the different elements of the turn were interlocking pretty well. The fact that there's a mission at the beginning, so I know what matters at the end of the turn. So, well, now we need to collect gold, and now we need intel to be able to do one in that bit and be able to complete that secret mission. But by the way, to complete the secret mission, I also need to have some things. So if I devote everything to win the bid and I don't have a secret mission to complete as a reward for winning the bid, what's the point? Then I put all of my eggs in one basket, which is the secret mission, and I don't get to score it because you win the bid. There are very interesting ways in which, again, these elements interlock with one another, how it's the worker placement game will give you the resources and that you will use later, and will help you set up the area majority. And I call it an area majority game because you don't just collect resources, although in many cases you do for some of those spaces, but there are actions that you can take there, which again makes its own mini game, and some areas are resolved before others, so you're setting up things for maybe areas you're resolving later in the turn. It's a legit mini game, and then you start the other mini game of the bid. And sometimes it's a foregone conclusion because I see you don't have a lot of that resource, I saw you didn't do very well in collecting it, so I think I have better chances. But maybe you gave up, like, okay, this one I'm not going to bid, so I'm going to build something else, I'm going to unlock an action for later, etc., etc., etc. So, those things are actually very well connected. Each of these mini games leads into the next quite well. Again, it's not going to be for everybody's taste because it's not an elegant game. When you take 3 game mechanics, which are fairly different, and you turn into 3 mini games, which you're playing is a chain every turn, with changing unique powers based on the position in the hierarchy, then you're gonna have a lot. I was surprised that the game, with so many different moving parts, did not feel fiddly, because again, it felt like they were organically connected. But you're gonna switch gears a lot mentally, and I enjoyed that personally. But I can totally see if you're for the clean, nice, elegant Euro game, well, this is not it. This is not it. This is a collection of mini games that work surprisingly well, that I found engaging, I find to be challenging. The James Bond element can be a little bit punishing. Maybe in a game with such a tight economy, that's the one element that if James Bond strikes in a certain area and you build up a lot, then it's going to be very hard for you to come back, and maybe you won't come back. But there's that. Maybe I wish James Bond was a little less powerful. I guess it makes sense thematically. But from the point of view of gameplay, that may be one moment of luck, which is considerable luck factor, which may be too much. But I haven't found that to ruin my enjoyment overall. So, SPECTRE, the board game, it plays differently from many other games, not because it invents any new mechanics, but because it puts them together in an original way. It's kind of demanding to learn, and again, with asymmetrical gameplay, then it's more demanding even to learn how to play it well. The material production doesn't help you particularly well getting into the game, but once you get there, it's a perfectly enjoyable game with a lot of interesting, challenging, nice decisions. It can be a little bit punishing, but also I didn't see analysis paralysis being a problem, since well, you don't have a lot of actions to paralyze, to feel paralyzed about. SPECTRE, the board game. I wish the material production was more efficient, but overall it is a pretty good design.